I was so excited to have Dr. Temple Grandin as a guest on the show. She's the subject of HBO's 5-time Emmy Award-winning film, a renowned autism advocate, and one of Time Magazine's top 100 most influential people. Temple's journey is a testament to the power of early intervention and the potential within all learners.
I had no speech until age 4, so I had very severe autism. A lot of people didn't think I'd amount to anything.
Dr. Grandin emphasizes the importance of understanding and valuing the different ways people think, both in education and the workplace.
And the first step is realizing different thinkers exist and they can work together in a complementary manner because we need all the different kinds of minds.
Adapting our teaching methods to be mindful of how other people think is crucial, and Dr. Grandin gives us great insight into how she perceives and thinks about the world.
I have to relate math back to something real, like you cut a pizza up into fours. That's fractions. And then you have your mathematical kids where they need to be moved ahead in math and they're getting bored in school doing baby math. For me, that book's a doorstop, but for another kid, that old book you dug out of the attic is a door.
It's all about understanding and celebrating how differently we all think. Welcome to the School Leaders Project. The School Leaders Project is an initiative by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. Without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Dr. Temple Grandin.
Well, I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. I had no speech until age 4, so I had very severe autism as a very young child. And I was lucky to get into really good early intervention. A lot of people didn't think I'd amount to anything. That was stupid. And I've done design work, livestock industry all over the world. I designed the front end of all the Cargill beef plants back in the 90s. And I think that's doing pretty good for somebody who can't do algebra. And one of the things, there's different ways that people think. And I'm what's called an object visualizer. And I talk about that in my book, Visual Thinking. And one of my big concerns is my kind of mind that can't do higher math is getting screened out.
Absolutely.
But my kind of mind is what I call the clever engineers. We're the people that figure out all the mechanical stuff. And then you have the mathematical engineers, they're the visual spatial people. And then, of course, you've got word thinkers. And the first step is realizing different thinkers exist and they can work together in a complementary manner because we need all the different kinds of minds. I've done a lot of talk to businesses. I said, you need that weird guy who can't do algebra to keep the elevators working in this building or to keep the water system running.
I love that you brought up your book, Visual Thinking, because I have just been captivated by reading it. And you touched on the point that you bring up 3 different kinds of thinkers.
Yeah.
The object visualizers, the spatial visualizers, and the verbal thinkers.
That's right.
So for our audience, what are some ways that you can recognize those different types of thinkers?
Well, a lot of people are mixtures. But you get a label, like maybe autism, dyslexia, ADHD, or some other label. You tend to be extreme, an extreme object visualizer. I think in photographs, where the mathematical thinker, the visual spatial, thinks in patterns. They are not the same thing. The mathematician thinks in patterns. And then, of course, your verbal thinker thinks in words. Now, I did not know that other kinds of thinking existed until I was in my late 30s. So I tell educators and business leaders, the first step is you have to realize different thinking exists. So how can you tell what kind of a kid a thinker is? What kind of a thinking a kid is? Usually you don't in 3-year-olds, but they get a little older, the visual thinkers like art. They like mechanical things. They like Legos. And then when they get into abstract math, they have trouble with it. I have to relate math back to something real, like you cut a pizza up into fours. That's fractions. That I understand. And then you have your mathematical kids where they need to be moved ahead in math. And they're getting bored in school doing baby math. And the way they teach math now is really weird. Math kids like old-fashioned math books that are just numbers. You might have a 3rd grader that can do that high school algebra book. For me, that book's a doorstop. But for another kid, that old book you dug out of the attic is a door. Just let them take off with it. But you don't know unless you expose. Right. I was exposed to musical instruments. I wasn't very good at them. Another kid takes off with that. Music and math go together.
Okay.
And art and mechanics go together.
Cool.
Art and mechanics go together. I know that sounds crazy, but they do.
It makes sense, though. Architects, all the different careers that kind of combine those two. Engineering. Yeah. And then visual thinkers, that's what schools are typically designed around. Not visual thinkers, I'm sorry. Verbal thinkers is what school is typically designed for.
Designed around verbal thinkers. And let's look at some of the accommodations that my kind of mind will need. If I was a computer, I've got big warehouses full of servers for picture memory. But I'm an old Intel 286, or I'm a phone with 1.5 bars of service. Takes time to download the web page. And so my processor speed is slow. So one of the things that I have a lot of trouble with is long strings of verbal information. Let's say they go yak, 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 telling me a sequence of stuff to do. I can't remember that.
Okay.
I need to write down the steps like a pilot's checklist. And that's something I would need now. If somebody shows me how to, close out the cash register of Walmart. Let's say I got that job now. I would have to write down the steps.
Or see pictures of the steps, I would imagine.
Yeah, but it'd be easier to just do it like a pilot's checklist. Because all I need is just keyword memory joggers for each step.
So that's one way we can support as educators. It's just
a very, very simple thing. And there's a lot of jobs that be saved to doing this. I can tell you 2 sad stories of jobs lost. One of them was electrician apprentice. And they go yak, 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 yak. And then they install the wrong type of light switch. Put the dimmer switch in the wrong place.
Right.
See, if they had just written down each
Step
day
one.
the stuff to install, that wouldn't have happened. Or the boss gets mad and says, well, I already showed you how to clean the ice cream machine. Are you stupid?
Yeah.
You see, where if they just wrote down the steps, but the verbal thinker is very linear. They can remember that just fine.
Sequencing.
Yeah, which I don't. I need an external working memory.
Very cool.
A very, very simple accommodation that would save a lot of jobs.
That's so good to know.
The other thing is, don't put me on the crazy takeout window. Rapid multitasking, crazy, chaotic jobs. Chaotic stores during the holidays. Something to be avoided. Some of the kind of jobs that have worked really well for the visual thinkers is inventing mechanical equipment. I have worked with them. And one of them has a corporate jet. Took one welding class. He builds beef plants, and he cannot do algebra. And he has a corporate jet.
So there's success to be had, I think is what you're saying.
Yes, there is. And for the visual thing, but what's happening now, I'm seeing visual thinkers, just smashing up against all these algebra requirements, and they can't do something like become a veterinary technician because they failed their 2nd or 3rd algebra class. Now, there's a little tiny bit of algebra for dosing drugs, but that can be memorized. And dosing drug stuff, that's non-negotiable. They got to learn that. But the thing is, that's being related back to something real.
Because that's one of the biggest barriers that I found in your book to visual thinkers is this higher level math, and specifically algebra.
Higher level math. I could do my arithmetic. The other thing I could not do, and I was in 3rd grade, we were taught borrowing and subtraction, the old-fashioned way, and I marked the paper. If I had not been allowed to mark the paper, I could not have done it. I have no working memory. Almost no working memory. Like let's say I've got somebody's phone number on my phone, but I want to text them. I have to write the phone number down and then go over to the text program.
So just that transfer from memory into texting.
Well, I can hardly barely remember a phone number. Now, I have certain phone numbers I've memorized, like my own phone number, Cheryl's phone number, things like that. Some numbers I've memorized.
Interesting.
But let's say it's a strange number, and they call me, and then I call them, and they didn't answer, so then I want to text them. I've got to get out a pen, write down the number, then I go over to the text.
One simile in your book that you describe to use how your mind works is like Google Images, searching in Google Images. Can you share a little bit about that process?
Basically, Google Images puts them out like in a gallery format.
Okay.
Or a light table format. My images come up sequentially. Okay. And they're like those little live videos where they move just a little bit that you can have on your phone. So it's more like coming up like a series of images. And if you look at the HBO movie, Temple Grandin, it shows exactly how I think.
That's so cool.
Or if you want to get an idea of how I think, give me a key word. It's associative thinking. It's not linear. In fact, yesterday I talked to a man at the airport who was a visual thinker. And he was in special ed. And he said when he was a kid, he fixed everybody's bicycle. And people didn't understand how he thinks. And I showed him visual thinking, and he got the Kindle version and was reading it on the plane. I got a text from someone, already read like 3 chapters of the book. It's explaining exactly how I think.
Oh, how
And
empowering.
yeah, I mean, and they thought he was stupid. And the kinds of jobs that, my kind of mind's good at is fixing equipment, mechanical devices, inventing mechanical devices. So give me a key word and I will tell you how my mind associates. And be a little creative. Don't do house or car or something that's in my office.
Okay, a creative word is something you can associate with.
Yeah.
Flower.
Okay, well, I'm seeing, I think we got a flower on that fan behind you. So now I'm seeing Japan. That fan reminded me of Japan. And now I'm seeing a bento box we ate on a train. Okay, but you see how there is an association. It's better to ask me something that I can't see.
Oh, does that kind of stall it for you?
Well, because I think that fan, it's kind of blurry, but I thought maybe it had flowers on it.
Okay, what about Sharpie marker? Tiger.
Well, I'm seeing that to the Life of Pi, that picture of the book cover with the tiger on it. I'm seeing Tony the Tiger from the old Kellogg's cornflake ads from the 50s. And now I'm getting off on some other cereal ads like Lucky Charms. Now I'm thinking about how much sugar's in those things. So now I see a big sugar canister we used to have. But you see how I got off the subject, but it has
Connected.
But there is a connection. There is a connection.
So as a teacher, can I help by helping to make those connections more explicit? Is that what supports you as a learner?
Well, the thing is the first step as a teacher is realizing that they think differently. And I want to encourage the skills that can turn into jobs.
Right.
And right now we have a huge shortage of skilled trades. And I'm not talking about laying floor tiles or roofing. I'm talking about high-end skilled trades. Welding, heating and air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, and then also machine shop and equipment inventing and industrial maintenance, all kinds of stuff with industrial machines. When the kids are little, I want to visual thinkers like me, let's encourage all the Legos, but let's encourage them to invent things with the Legos. And one of the mistakes I'm seeing people make when the kid gets a label like autism or dyslexia, they're not graduating to tools. I was using tools in 2nd grade, hammer, pliers, and screwdriver. And then in 5th grade, I was using a little hand saw. Well, kids need to be graduating to tools. And they need to be doing real shop in middle school. We've got to introduce kids early. Coming home from the airport yesterday, there was a lady pilot being interviewed. She was talking about getting into the industry. And she said that basically, if you want to get kids interested in aviation, you've got to expose them in middle school. And I think this is true for a lot of things. It's almost too late in high school. And then things like musical instruments, that should be real little kids.
You talk so much in your book
today in elementary school that they never make anything. This is my kid's project book, Calling All Minds. It's got little kites and parachutes and things I made as a child. But we've got kids today that have never made a paper airplane, never made a paper snowflake. You're talking about the most basic things they've never made.
Right. You talk in your book about just the importance of experiential learning, of things like field trips and home economics and shop class. Why are these so important for visual thinkers like yourself?
Well, because a visual thinker's got to do stuff. That's the thing. And the thing is, we need our visual thinkers. I talked to a retired man that worked in an electronic chip making factory. He was a visual thinker. And they were having problems with the cameras that print the little tiny integrated circuits. And that was a solution. And he found that there was some contaminants in it. So he puts it in a centrifuge and spins out the contaminants.
Cool.
Then he took a vacuum thing and got the bubbles out of it. Real simple. Totally improved the process. And that's not anything that had anything to do with math. He says, well, I can just spin that gunk out.
Because you can see it.
And then
you can see the problem.
Bubbles off. That's what he did. He's retired now. He was considered the wizard of chip making, back when he was young.
The School Leaders Project is an initiative by Toddle, your all-in-one teaching and learning platform made for teachers and by teachers. Toddle truly started as a passion project in a school that thought that teaching tech should be as innovative and creative as teaching teams. And we're now loved by more than 1,500 progressive K-12 schools all around the world.
Part of this, I think, is that Americans in particular, but internationally as well, there's a bias against blue-collar work. and there's a bias against apprenticeship in schools.
Well, the thing is that they look at stupid kids go to shop.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's a lot of stuff we're not making. We do not make the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. It's from Holland. We no longer make the mechanical equipment for a pork processing plant or a chicken processing plant. It's from Holland. Okay, why is that happening? Because they don't stick their nose up at a shop. In ninth grade, the kid can go university or go tech, and they don't stick their nose up at it. We tend to look at it sort of a lesser form of intelligence. I can tell you, I spent 25 years in heavy construction.
Right.
In the 80s and the 90s, I was out on big Cargill plants under construction. Let me tell you, it's a different kind of intelligence. They just see how to do it. See, mathematicians calculate how to do it. Visual thinkers just see how to do it. No, we need their skills.
Well, and it's transferable across so many different things. Like you mentioned in your book, things like, the theater shop and creating sets and lighting design. You mentioned chefs. You mentioned different types of engineering.
Chess is pattern. Chess and Rubik's Cube is the visual spatial pattern. Now, the man I talked to yesterday at the airport, when he was in high school, he was put in charge of the theater shop and making sets. Now, that sounds very similar to what I did. I wasn't interested in being in the play, but making sets and costumes.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fun to do. See, that's technical theater. And there's careers in that. You go to these big trade shows and they have all this lighting stuff and everything. I'm doing a talk there and I got to go back there and give them my memory stick. Talk to those guys. About 25% of them are autistic. And they're very good at what they do.
So it requires some creativity, I think, and exposing kids to the idea that there are careers outside of, the 5 careers we all tend to know about in elementary school. Like, how do we get kids exposed to these just different?
We have to get kids exposed to stuff. And when I was down in Texas just recently, we were talking about this. I said, we've got to expose kids to shop in middle school. And then the lady pilot yesterday that I heard on the radio, if you want to get girls interested in aviation, well, they need to go try out a simulator, maybe not the real fancy one, but try out some kind of simulator, go visit planes and stuff in middle school.
Right.
She emphasized the importance of middle school. And I just got back from a meeting in Texas where I told them the same thing. We've got to get these kids exposed to real serious stuff in middle school, that they can see that that's something they can do. It's almost too late in high school. And when I was a young kid, I was making all kinds of paper airplanes. We've got some kids growing up today where they're totally removed from the world of the practical. And they've got to make policy. Let me tell you something shocking. I was recently in an autism meeting. I'm not going to say where it was because this is not very complimentary of this state. But I talked to a legislator just within the last month who was making educational policy. And she did not know that autism also had a nonverbal type of autism where the kids don't speak. She did not know that. Basic thing. And she's going to make policy, the most basic knowledge. We've got people making policy about really important stuff like energy and water, and they don't know basic stuff.
It's so important.
They just turn it all into politics. See, the thing about a visual thinker, I want to solve problems.
Yeah.
How do we actually do something about something?
Since I've read your book, every person I meet now, when they tell me their career, I ask them, I say, okay, so when you envision X, what do you see a picture? Do you see words? What do you see? And it's opened up so many fascinating conversations. It's just this slight question we can ask ourselves that has a profound impact in how we interact.
Well, and the other thing is the visual thinkers tend to gravitate over towards visual thinking careers.
Right.
But I'm seeing a lot of visual thinkers getting addicted to video games. And the one thing that will get them off of that is working on cars. And they find that the cars are more interesting than the video games.
So finding that thing that lights them up rather than just kind of sticking them in front of the screen.
But the problem is you have to expose kids to a lot of stuff. If they don't get exposed, how can they get interested? Right. I talk about developing the kids' strengths. I was good at art as a child. That was always encouraged. I was using tools as a young child. I was encouraged to make things. I had a little flute as a child. I couldn't figure out how to play it. But another kid's going to take off with that flute. Now it's just a cheap little child's toy flute.
I can hear it.
You see, one kid's going to take off with that, and the other kid is not. but you don't know until you expose them.
So it's almost like creating a profile of strengths, of exposing kids to different things.
Different things. We've got one of the kids going to take off in math. That's not going to be me. But then you need to let them take the higher math. Don't make them do the baby stuff. And the way they're doing all this math with all this verbal stuff, that's probably not the best for some of the math kids.
Right.
They probably need to just go back to the old-fashioned books where it's numbers. I remember reading some comments one time on Amazon about math books. A couple of people complaining about they just wanted a book with the numbers because the math head thinks in patterns, and then the word thinker thinks in words, and it's much more linear. The other problem with word thinkers is they overgeneralize. They very much overgeneralize. Okay, you have a big concept, like, okay, an inclusive classroom. Okay, how do we do that? I can give you some specifics, and long strings of verbal instruction don't work with a lot of kids. The other thing that can be a problem for some kids, also for individuals with head injuries, is seeing flicker on LED lights.
Oh.
I would guesstimate that 10 to 20% of kids labeled dyslexic see flicker on LED lights. Now, the thing is, they don't all flicker. So what you do is you take out your phone, you put it on regular slow motion video, and then you play it back in slow motion, and you'll find the bad lights.
Helpful.
And let's say the classroom's got really awful lights, no windows, and I can't get rid of the lights. Well, then you get a lamp from home, and then you go to the lamp store with your phone, you buy an LED that's not flicker, real bright one, put it in the lamp next to the kid's desk.
Simple little tweaks.
Simple. Now, they're very specific. They don't work for everybody, but you've got certain individuals where they have problems with flickering LED lights. But that doesn't explain all dyslexia. Only explains a subgroup. So a lot of people say, well, you don't have evidence-based for this. Well, if you just lump all the subjects together by dyslexia, you're not going to see anything. But I have seen that thing with the paper work. I just saw it work just the other day. And when it works like magic.
Do you have a collection of these almost, you call it magic, so almost these magic tricks, do you have them all collected somewhere for that?
Well, yeah, I've got them on my slides. The other thing, let's just go through them. The first thing is avoiding rapid multitasking.
Okay.
I'm a slow processor. Don't perform well in noisy environments, so I have trouble hearing in noisy environments. The pilot's checklist, external working memory. And if you actually look up pilot's checklist online, they're just keywords to jog the memory for a sequence of steps. Now, there's two kinds of places you need that pilot's checklist. Okay, let's say a task you have to do every day, like clean the ice cream machine, for example. Or like the electrician apprentice, I have different things I have to install each day. So it will change each day. And then the LED lighting thing, that's another thing, the colored paper. Another very simple thing. Let's say you have a child that can't stand certain noises. Let's say a vacuum cleaner. Sometimes you can give the kid the vacuum cleaner where they control it, where they control the awful noise. And the vacuum cleaner may go from the most hated thing to the fun thing to play with. I've seen that happen. Where the kid controls the noise. And then you've got some kids that wear headphones all the time. Yeah. That will make sound sensitivity worse. But what the kid can do is have them with you all the time. Have them with you all the time. And then you put them on for some really horrible, noisy places, what I call industrial strength washrooms or bathrooms, with all the flushers and hand dryers or automatic stuff going off. You'd wear it in there. Now, what about sounds you can't control, like dogs barking, babies crying? Well, you can get a very high fidelity audio recording. The child can control it. But it has to be high quality and have all those nasty high frequencies in it. It's got to be a quality audio file.
Cool.
Where the child controls it. And that can sometimes help desensitize, where they control it, gradually increasing the volume.
So my niece is very reactive to firework sounds. So do you think that would work similarly if I gave her an element of control?
It would work similar.
So just either...
A lot of dogs have that problem too. And why have we got more problems with dogs being afraid of thunder and things like this? And I think part of the problem is dogs today live a more sheltered life. They're not getting out and getting exposed to enough stuff.
So interesting.
Those are some really, simple things you can do. And then there's some individuals that need sensory breaks. There's some kids that squirm around in their chairs, and you can actually get these, they can sit on a ball, an exercise ball.
We should almost just have curiosity about, if a student is having a hardship, of just kind of playing with it and not looking at it as a fixed thing.
The other thing I'm finding is everyone overgeneralizes. There's another question I had this meeting I just went to the other day. We were talking about decorating the classroom. I said, well, I want to get LED lights don't flicker if we're doing new construction. And I don't really want checkerboards and stripes in the classroom.
Okay.
With high contrast. I want to avoid that. Well, then they were saying they had some purple checkerboard stuff, purple and white on the floor of the hallway at a school. And I said, yeah, I wouldn't do that in new construction. But it took me 5 whole minutes to dig out of this teacher what the kid was doing on that floor. And what he wanted to do was do hopscotch on it.
Makes sense.
Well, he didn't tell me. Well, then what I would do is say that, okay, we got to get to the next class quickly, but then at recess you can come in here and do hopscotch on the floor.
Right.
Give them a chance to do it. But I had to dig it out of them, what the kid was doing. Other kids are going to stop and not want to walk on it. See, this is where you got to tell me exactly what the problem is. I mean, I talked to him 5 whole minutes before I find out if the kid wanted to do hopscotch on it.
Right.
Well, that's going to affect how I'm going to deal with it. But you see, I see it.
Being curious. No assumptions, just be curious about your sense reaction.
It's the verbal thinker overgeneralizes, and there was another study that's in visual thinking, my visual thinking book. They tend to not do very much planning.
Huh.
Oh, I had a verbal thinker, big hat, huge ego. He was in charge of building a beef plant. And he wouldn't listen to anybody, and he was going to do it in 5 minutes. He was told by all the techies that they did not have enough wastewater treatment. They went ahead and built it, and the town closed it. He was an egomaniac verbal thinker. And he did not listen. It was a $20 million mistake.
Eesh.
Like, how could you do that?
Right.
You see, this is what worries me with a lot of political stuff. Because in my generation, we got stuff done in this country. We built the interstate highway system in the 50s. I remember it. We went to the moon, did stuff.
We need more doing.
We need more doing.
And doers. School that empowers doers.
The other thing I found with the people I worked with people that were autistic that built equipment for me. Once the shop gets to be a certain size, they got to hire a verbal thinker to run the business. You see, this is an example of the different minds working together.
Right.
They got to hire a verbal thinker to make sure that they build customers and customers pay. They get materials ordered. Doing the things that just run the business. Pay the rent on the building. Stuff like that.
And so much of this is intuitive, right? Like, what are the things that bring you joy, that bring you a sense of flow? And what are the things that feel really, really hard and challenging? And how do we make space for people to lean into those things that are affirming?
Well, the thing is, I just have to have the pilot's checklist. I have to have that accommodation. And I thought, all right, let's say I've got to learn to be a gate agent at the airport. Gate check a bag. Okay, then somebody shows you the keystrokes to do that. Well, a lot of people just pick that right up. I won't. I'd have to write down the keystrokes for gate check a bag. Write down the keystrokes for print the passenger's boarding pass. Write down the keystrokes for find a seat to print a boarding pass. And then I'd have to go home and flat memorize them and maybe make up jingles for them.
Where did you learn those strategies, Temple? Like, how did you realize that that's what you needed?
Well, I've been doing these talks for a long time, but I'll tell you the thing I'm going to fix at the airport. We've had very bad problems at Denver with frozen jet bridges, delaying flights. I'm going to make those go away. You say, because I'm visualizing how it could be frozen and how to prevent it.
Cool.
When the weather gets really super cold. It took an hour to get a jet bridge unfroze one night. And the wheels were spinning on it, and I could see it from the plane's window. I said, why don't you put some sand under those wheels?
Simple fix.
That's simple. And there's other things. I think the telescoping gets frozen. But that's the kind of stuff I can fix. But then they're going to say, you're stupid. I already showed you how to gate check a bag 3 times. Are you dumb? I've heard this kind of complaint, like they got guys working at McDonald's about the ice cream machine or the French fry machine. No, you have to write down the steps. Very simple accommodation and very essential.
Very cool. Another concept that really stood out to me in your book is that of neurodiversity. And it's a word, I had heard it before, but I never really connected it to the concept of biodiversity and the beauty of neurodiversity. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, you have the different kinds of minds have complementary skills. For example, when I worked on my visual thinking book, I wrote the rough drafts, and Betsy, my verbal co-author, kind of straightened out my kind of associative, not very linear writing. So that's different minds working together. Another thing I found on the big food processing plants is that my kind of thinker was inventing all kinds of mechanical devices, but the degreed engineer, the mathematician, was doing boilers, refrigeration, and roof trusses and snow load. You see, you need to have both. But where we've lost it is on the what I call clever engineering department, because you go back to the electronic chip making machine, It's based on physics that was done in the U.S. in a university, but it was made in Dutch workshop.
So we just don't make space for the tinkerers.
Well, the thing is, we need the tinkerers. And one of the things that motivated me to write the book was I went to 4 places right before COVID. I went to 2 pork plants with all imported equipment, brand new ones, 1 poultry plant in the Steve Jobs Theater. And the structural glass walls in Steve Jobs Theater were from Germany and Italy. Stood in the middle of it screaming, we don't make it anymore. Then, very shortly after, I learned about the chip making machine. Then COVID hit, and the book was our big COVID project.
One example of neurodiversity that I think would be really helpful for kids to hear about is big cats. And you talk about lions versus the more...
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
There's a really interesting paper. It's called Solitary Mammals as a Model for Autism. All right, let's take the cat family, especially the big cats. Lions are more social than tigers, leopards, or panthers. And there's some overlap here with autism genetics. Is a panther got a disability? You see, in the milder forms, it's just a personality variant. The lions are more social, and the panthers and the leopards are more solitary. And there's overlap genetically, some of the hormonal stuff with autism. And I think in its mildest forms, it's a personality variant. Now, obviously, if a kid has no speech,
game changer.
That's obviously a disability. But some of the nonverbal individuals with autism can learn to type independently. And that is something that needs to be done. And let me tell you a little secret. This goes back to processor speed. They have no ability to attention shift. Like, for example, on this desktop, the keyboard's way down here, and the print would appear way up here. They cannot make the attention shift. So you want to use an iPad or some other tablet where the print appears next to the top of the keyboard. So they can push the key and see the print appear simultaneously. That's really, really important.
Just removing the barriers.
Well, you see, I'm telling you specific things where you can remove a barrier.
Right.
And the thing that I ran into a lady at the airport yesterday, she recognized me, and her kid was having trouble with reading, and he had the print jiggled on the paper. She had kind of a light blue coat tied around her waist, and I said, get some paper to color that jacket, print a book on it. And I told her about the colored paper. Try it. I might have just jumped her kids 3 grades in reading because she ran into me in the hallway at the airport yesterday.
Are there other ways that we can help neurodiverse students to recognize their strengths and to recognize the beauty of it?
Exposing to enough stuff. My mother always encouraged my art ability.
Right.
Another kid, you need to be, if they're good at math, move them ahead in math. That's what you need to do. Don't make them do the baby stuff and make them become a behavior problem. Let them do the more advanced math. That's what you need to do.
Right. Instead of just trying to fix the deficits all the time, just give space and time for the strengths and to go deeper.
Well, there's a lot of pounding away on algebra, and it didn't work. So how did I manage to get a PhD? Well, even though I failed the SAT in math, and so did a lot of the other visual thinkers I worked with. Let's go back to the guy who worked for the chip factory that figured out put the solution in the centrifuge to get the little particles out of it. He started out in the stock room with the supplies. That's how he started. It was pure backdoor. And I have seen that with the meat industry. Somebody gets a job on the line, gravitate to maintenance. 15 years later, they're in charge of building a new plant addition. Strictly backdoor.
That brings me back to apprenticeships then. And can you share, you talked about the Swiss model, and I know in Colorado they're doing an apprenticeship model. So where are places where apprenticeships are working?
Well, one of the things is a thing called TACT in Colorado, where they're teaching autistic adults to fix cars. Cool. And the car dealerships can't hire them fast enough. Yeah, you see but you see the visual thinkers like me are the ones that are going to go for the mechanics.
Right.
You see, then the mathematician can become the mathematically trained engineer. But the thing is, the mathematically trained engineer doesn't think out some of the visual thinking stuff. Let's look at something like the Mars rover. The mathematician's got it there, but somebody hand-built the cameras on a workbench. Each camera will fit in a shoebox. They're not very big. Somebody made those on a workbench. The beautiful cameras took those pictures. You have to have both.
So looking at jobs and kind of picking them apart and saying, what are the different skills here and what might be your areas of interest?
Well, I could tell you another backdoor. I just heard about this year. A guy got a job in a fiberglass tank factory, just as a laborer. 6 months later, he repaired every machine in the factory.
Wild.
Another guy got a job just smoothing marble, and he learned how to run the saws, and then they were throwing away all these little bitty marble scraps like this. He says, can I have the marble scraps that are in the dumpster? And he made beautiful chess tables out of them.
Huh.
And then he learned how to fix the programmable logic controllers that run computerized marble cutting equipment. He's now flying all around the country fixing this stuff.
Wild.
Another back door. You see, my mind goes in specific examples.
Right.
And then I can take specific examples and put them in categories. Okay, those were backdoor jobs. Then there's other people that go and do a conventional interview and they go in the front door. So I could, sort specific examples into front door. But a lot of the visual thinkers that are successful, they went in the back door. And I also worked with people who built equipment for me where a single welding class started their business.
Right. So how do we make it not a back door? How do we make it just a mainline stream that every kid gets the opportunity to explore?
Let's look at what Europe's doing. I've looked up education in Europe. You can go university or tech route. Italy, you can go university, tech, or art route.
Beautiful.
Because they have their fashion industry, and they need people in that.
And Colorado, I think, is doing similarly. They're looking for the needs in industries in Colorado, and then they're backwards mapping from there and saying, okay, well, let's have apprenticeships in Air Force engineering.
But we have to expose middle school kids, because I told them in Texas that it's almost too late in high school. They got to be using some tools in elementary school. They need to be exposed to shop in middle school. And this lady pilot yesterday on the radio was talking about how that you need to expose kids to aviation in middle school. Where they can some museums have simulators that are not as fancy as the ones the airlines have, but they're pretty cool.
Right.
I've tried them just a little bit. Didn't have enough time. There's one that NASA has as a space shuttle simulator.
Cool.
That I wanted to try. This other little kid was yanking the controls around too much. I said, calm down, you'll never land it if you jerk the controls around like that. I would have liked to have tried that simulator. And then you've got to calm the kid down and say, now wait a minute, if you jerk the controls around like that, and everything was like this, the shuttle's going to crash. You've got to be more gentle with the controls and calm down.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll land it. But somebody needs to introduce them to that, simulator, and then kind of instruct them on how to land it. This kid wasn't learning anything.
Just playing.
They're just doing this. And I was there for a very, very short time. I would have really liked to have spent 30 minutes trying that simulator. Like maybe when the museum was closed and I could really, really try it.
So that's what our kids need, is more of that sustained time of practice.
And then you also need to have, like if I'd been there longer, I would have given this little boy, he's about 8, some guidance system. First of all, calm down and move the controls gently and see what it does. And calm down and don't jerk it around. That's the first thing you got to do.
Right.
Before we land it, let's just try flying it straight. So for that kid to get the exposure, needs to have a little bit of guidance.
Temple, your newest book is all about autism in education. So we've spent a lot of time talking about the different thinkers. I know this is a generalization question, but what are some of your big takeaways from writing that book?
I already talked about understanding the different kinds of minds. Now, some other things where autistic kids get bullied in school is friends who shared interests. Autistic kids aren't interested in socialization for the sake of socialization. They're more interested in things. And so some of my best friends, we built stuff together.
Yeah.
Of the shared interest. When I was in high school, we rode horses together. That's an example of a shared interest. Or then we were in Model Rocket Club together. Or a kid might be in a Star Wars club. Those are shared interests. You see, I'm more interested in, interesting stuff. That's rather than just social.
You kind of touched on this idea of becoming overwhelmed or kind of freezing. And the work I knew you most for was for your hugging machine. Are there things we can do to help our students?
Well, some kids respond really well to deep pressure. It's calming. Not everybody. And there's a lot of inexpensive ways to do it, other than a squeezing machine is expensive. But weighted vests, weighted blankets. One lady would just lay over the top of an exercise ball. Simple stuff, cushions, things like this. And some individuals are pressure seekers. They find pressure calming. There's also like a suit you can get online, sort of like a superhero suit that's sort of tight all over. And they like wearing that. These are relatively simple things. And sometimes the weighted vest works better if you put it on for 20 minutes and then take it off for a little while. Then you put it on again. And so that can be helpful. Now you can get all these fidget spinners and stuff like that. I mean, I used to sit in the classroom and do this. That drives people crazy. But now there's things you can fidget with that don't make a noise.
Right. So are those the best things for students who are feeling overwhelmed? Just things
Well,
like...
some students just going to have a sensory break. They get too overwhelmed, especially in a noisy environment, because I have a very difficult time screening out background noise. Like, I'm functionally deaf in a noisy restaurant. I cannot hear what's being said.
It's just...
Can't screen the background noise out.
Interesting. Okay, so just again, I think consistently a theme of being aware, noticing our students, and making little tweaks and adjustments based on the needs that you see arise.
That's right.
Makes sense. All right, Temple, I have a set of a final 3 kind of lightning round questions that I ask every guest who comes in the show. So are you ready for our final 3?
Yep.
Okay, the first, what is a book that has had the most profound impact on your practice?
A book that had a profound impact on me?
Yeah.
Well, I really like some of the books by Lauren Isley talking about natural history. I read those when I was, in the 70s. I was still in my 20s. Really liked some of those books. And when I was a very young child, I loved Black Beauty, both the children's version and the grown-up version. I really related to this horse that putting his check rein on him, pulling his head up high, and he couldn't lean into the carriage and pull it. That was one of my favorite books as a child. Another favorite book as a child was about famous inventors.
Yes.
It's a book I had in the 4th grade. It was very similar to the Smithsonian book of famous inventors. And it told their backstory. And some of these famous inventors were the odd kind of kids, and I related to that. So as a little kid, it was Black Beauty and famous inventors.
Okay. Makes sense. I could see that book giving you hope of oh, you can be a little different and do amazing game-changing things.
My grandfather was the co-inventor of the autopilot for airplanes, MIT trained engineer. He worked with an autistic guy in a loft, tinkering around until they finally got his crazy idea to work.
Awesome.
And when we went over to Granny and grandfather's for dinner, on Sundays and stuff, I'd sit with him. Well, everybody else is in the living room yakking. Me and grandfather would sit together, and I'd ask him questions. Why is the sky blue? Why is grass green? And he would explain it.
So beautiful.
I was
that you had that.
3rd grade when I was doing that.
It's amazing the difference that a knowledgeable person who sparks with you, the difference that can make at an early age.
One of the things that held my interest in science. I also had a really great science teacher in high school, really good science teacher, who gave me interesting projects. That got me interested.
Very cool. Okay, second question for you, Temple. This is my personal research question, is this tension between having really productive, but also really joyous workplaces. And how do you think we find that balance between being really productive, but also really joyous?
Well, I worked on a lot of construction projects for a lot of different people. And the most productive and the best projects were the ones where it was a fun, happy workplace.
Any keys for how we do it?
An email from Jim Uhl, who was a contractor I worked with when I first started. And he seeked me out because he'd seen my drawings. And he seeked me out because I was good at designing things. And we built the most wonderful project together at John Wayne's Red River Ranch. Well, I just read that it got turned into housing development, so I'm not happy about that. You see, he liked my drawings. There's some of my drawings right there.
Wow.
And that was a great project. We had a great manager on it. The project worked really well. The really good projects, I've been on the very best projects, and the project came out really good. And then I've been on projects that came out bad. The ones that had the bad bosses, swearing, screaming, F-word spewing, maniac. And there was a lot of problems on these jobs, a lot of safety issues, lots of stuff that did not work, stuff that failed. When it comes to construction, the good construction project has a manager that does make it an inclusive workplace. Also, keeps it organized, because you can't have the subcontractors falling on top of each other. You've got to schedule stuff. Now, I've been on the very worst construction projects. I've also been on some of the very best, and they are a happy workplace, the very best.
And you say that comes from safety and organization.
Safety, but also building stuff correctly, having stuff work. These were complicated projects. We were not just doing concrete flat work. These were complicated projects. And the good projects, had cared about doing things right. They didn't miss the owner. See, like when we were working on the first one of those dip vats, manager of the feed yard was a wonderful boss. He really cared about having things done right. Then you go out in another project, and they're not just screaming at you, swearing at you. You still managed to pull the project off. And I made the project work, but boy, that plant had trouble.
It was miserable.
A happy workplace is a productive workplace. I remember with the Cargill plant when they were doing the major rebuilding the whole front end of it. This was a good manager. He saw that people were getting too tired, and he shut the job down for a day. Said, go home. Good for him. And I was there when they did that. You see, I'm thinking of specific examples.
Yeah, but you and I have a good collaboration. You give specific.
I've been on projects with horrible bosses where we had great colleagues. Or we'd sit down in the job trailer or in the workshop complaining about the bosses. So we had our nice place in the shop, but the boss was swear words spewing horribleness. And then you can have the bosses where they're nice to colleagues and the higher ups, and then they're bad towards people they consider under them.
Yeah, it's too common.
I've worked for those.
My third and final question for you is that our audience is specifically school leaders. So if you could get on a stage and give one piece of advice to school leaders that you think would make the biggest change, what do you wish?
We need to be developing strengths. We need to expose kids when they're young to all kinds of different things that can turn into careers, musical instruments, theater, shop, cooking, sewing, art, woodworking, all different kinds of things, because you've got to show kids interesting things to get them interested in interesting things. I'm now seeing a slide of tiling patterns that were used, Penrose tiling used by Stephen Hawking in his mathematical stuff. You can get this stuff free online, and you're just showing kids all kinds of cool stuff. And they go say, well, I want to do that when I grow up. I find when I go into some schools and I ask kids what they want to do, well, the kid hasn't had much experiences beyond, a few local stores.
Right.
And, well, they don't know what they want to be. They haven't been exposed to enough stuff. And then I have an example, I have my slideshow of Michelangelo. He was a grubby little 12-year-old school dropout, but he was running around in churches seeing great art. That's exposure. And he grew up with stone cutting tools. Then he started to make stuff, and then he was apprenticed into a shop. Cool. So it starts out exposure first, then mentoring. That's exactly what I had. You got exposed first, and then you have to mentor and to help them develop. I don't care what the field is. But a lot of kids, I don't think, get exposed to enough stuff to find out that they might like using tools. Right. I was exposed to I had piano lessons. I had this little flute, which I never did learn how to play. I couldn't figure out how to do the fingering. Another kid's going to be exposed to that flute and take off with it.
Right.
But you see, you don't know unless they're exposed.
Makes a lot of sense.
So that's one of the things, is getting kids exposed to a lot of stuff and see kind of what they gravitate towards. See, in my generation, kids just got exposed to just so much stuff.
Something you said earlier that resonates with me is that for some kids it's going to be a door, and for others it's going to be a doorstop.
Well, that was the algebra book.
And that's great.
Book, let's take an old-fashioned algebra book where it's all numbers, not this weird verbal stuff. For me, it's a doorstop. But you give that to another third grader that's a math genius, it will be a door. They'll take off with it. But if you don't expose them to that algebra book, you don't know.
Right.
See, this is the problem. And there's all kinds of free lessons online, all kinds of free stuff. And you look back at some of the old innovators, they'd be in a home where there was a lot of books.
Right.
So then the kids pulling his dad's engineering books off the shelf. See, sometimes the exposure was that way. And I'm seeing kids growing up today totally removed from the world of the practical. I had a girl in my class who'd never measured anything. And then looking for things to teach kids work skills. When I was 13, my mother got me a sewing job. And it was in a seamstress's house. She worked out of her home. And I took apart dresses and hand-hemmed them. That was just done in the neighborhood. I'm now thinking of another place where we went to this junky old hangar, and they were reconditioning an ancient old plane in there. And I'm going, oh boy, I could show this to the right kid and maybe have the mechanic there, have the kid work on it.
Light up.
Yep. It's a door. In a warehouse building where they used to store my books, the next unit had a really cool custom motorcycle shop in it. And I'm looking at that and I'm going, it's a door. You see, I see it. Things that you could get a kid interested in a career, but they've got to get exposed to stuff. I mean, I've seen brilliant kids as a teenager building elaborate stuff out of Legos, and they never got introduced to a tool. They were building trains that actually worked out of Legos. Now, there's nothing wrong with Legos, but I think, yeah, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, but then they need to graduate to tools.
Absolutely.
And I'm not seeing that happen. And we have a gigantic shortage right now of high-end skilled trades. These jobs are not going to go away. Somebody's got to fix elevators. Oh, it was just the airport yesterday, and they had an escalator all torn apart. And, they're having a hard time finding enough people to fix this stuff. And I talked to a young lady that was in charge of construction. I said, how'd you get that job? You're real young. I took a 2-year community college class and went to work on a construction project. I'll give you another example. The project manager for a beautiful new chemistry building. She got a political science degree. And she got a job working for a construction company answering phones. Then she gravitated over towards bidding. Then she worked on pricing jobs. She was in charge of building our chemistry building. That's like 5 years ago. That's recent. That's not something from years ago. Okay, that you see, I'm giving you just specific examples of cool jobs.
Cool jobs, cool doors.
The doors are there. It goes back to me walking up to the editor of the magazine. It's just shown in the movie, and it's accurate. Getting his card. I saw that door, got the card, and then I produced an article. People don't see the doors.
Yeah.
And I was just in a community where a lot of low-income people, and I said, there's more resources in this community than you'd think. And we're driving, and I'm seeing all kinds of mechanical shops and, seeing places where the kid could get started.
I love that, Temple. I'm so appreciative of your perspective and the way you think and the work you're doing to share that with the world. I think it's so important.
Well, the simplest thing, I think in the last week, I've helped 2 people where their reading is going to jump up a few grades with light blue paper. One at the airport and one at this other meeting.
Little shifts, little tweaks that can make a world.
They're little tweaks, and the thing is, they're important little tweaks. And since I've been in this for a long time, there's other tweaks that don't work as well, but there's certain things like the pilot's checklist. Boy, that will save jobs. And then a subgroup of dyslexia where the colored paper works. Another subgroup of people where we've got to deal with the LED light flicker. And you can detect that with slow motion video. And they're not necessarily the most expensive lights either. There are some cheap LED lights that don't flicker that can be purchased economically. Then dimmer switches can sometimes cause problems with them. But some of the TVs, like I'm on a TV type monitor right now, and some of these flicker. Laptops and tablets don't flicker.
Okay.
They never flicker. But some of your monitors and your flat screen tellies do flicker.
Just knowing that.
You have to test them. And the thing for testing them, it has to be one of the newer phones. But it's right there, either in your pocket or in somebody else's pocket. And you put it on regular slow motion, not super slow motion. I just saw a phone the other day that had 2 speeds of slow motion. It's regular slow motion.
Okay.
You see, it's a different way of thinking where the pilot's checklist thing, that has come up probably 25 or 30 times.
Right.
Working memory. I need an external working memory.
Love it.
Okay, well, it's been great to talk to you, and I hope my book, Visual Thinking, is going to give educators some real insight.
This was such a pleasure, and reading your book has been transformative for me, so I really appreciate your time.
No, the first step I tell the heads of industry, because I do a lot of talks in industry, is the first step is you have to realize different kinds of thinking exist. That's your first step. And I didn't know it until I was in my late 30s that verbal thinking existed.
So wild.
That's totally wild.
If you can recognize the problem.
And that was when a therapist made a church steeple like that. Just 2 lines. That blew my mind.
So teachers just need to know that this is the thing that's out there. We can problem solve for it, but we can't if we don't realize it's out there and it's a problem.
Well, if you don't realize it's out there, you see, that's the thing. And they, I hate it when people say, well, stupid kids go take shop. I can tell you right now, it's a different kind of thinking. I spent 25 years on heavy construction sites. I'm not doing it now. I miss it. I'm always Googling, like to look at construction stuff, wherever it's being done. It's a different kind of thinking. See how they do it.
Right. I love it. Such an important message.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me, and I think I'll leave the studio. It's been great talking to you.
So great talking to you, Temple. I hope you have an amazing weekend.
All right, thank you so much, and goodbye.
Thanks, Temple. Bye.
Yeah.